So welcome to the reading of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl, and the copy that we're going to be using today is illustrated by Quentin, so it's the original illustrations. This particular copy is from around 95, which is nice because it's been well loved and well used over that time. And the story is from roughly the 1960s, I believe. So thank you to Storytime friend Katie for making our bookmark, which we'll keep in here. And obviously thank you to our Storytime friend Em, who helps us provide Pooh Bear's mug. So let's get started. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed the story of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So leave the bookmark with Pooh Bear. Chapter 14, Mr. Willy Wonka. Mr. Wonka was standing all alone just inside the open gates of the factory. And what an extraordinary little man he was. He had a black top hat on his head. He wore a coat tail made of a beautiful plum-coloured velvet. His trousers were bottle green. His gloves were pearly grey. And in one hand he carried a fine gold-topped walking cane. Covering his chin there was a small, neat, pointed black beard, a goatee. And his eyes were the most marvellously bright. They seemed to be sparkling and twinkling at you all the time. The whole face, in fact, was alight with fun and laughter. And how clever he looked, how quick, sharp, and full of life. He kept making quick, jerky little movements with his head, cocking it this way and that, and taking everything in with those bright, twinkling eyes. He was like a squirrel in a quickness of his movements, like a quick, clever old squirrel from the park. Suddenly, he did a funny little skipping dance in the snow, and he spread his arms wide, and he smiled at the 5 children who were clustered near the gates, and he called out, "Welcome, my little friends, welcome to the factory." His voice was high and fluty. "Will you come forward one at a time, please?" he called out, "and bring your parents. Then show me your golden ticket and give me your name. Who's first?" A big fat boy stepped up. "I'm Augustus Gloop," he said. "Augustus!" cried Mr. Wonka, seizing his hand and pumping it up and down with terrific force. "My dear boy, how good to see you! Delighted, charmed, overjoyed to have you with us. And these are your parents? How nice! Come in, that's right. Step through the gates." Mr. Wonka was clearly just as excited as everybody else. "My name," said the next child to go forward, "is Veruca Salt." "My dear Veruca, how do you do? What a pleasure this is. You do have an interesting name, don't you? I always thought that a Veruca was some sort of wart you got on the sole of your foot. But I must be wrong, mustn't I? How pretty you look in that lovely mink coat. I'm so glad you could come. Dear me, this is going to be such an exciting day. I do hope you enjoy it. I'm sure you will. I know you will. Your father? How are you, Mr. Salt and Mrs. Salt? Overjoyed to see you. Yes, the ticket is quite in order. Please go in." The next 2 children, Violet Beauregard and Mike TV, came forward to have their tickets examined, and then to have their arms practically pumped off their shoulders by the energetic Mr. Wonka. And at last of all, a small, nervous voice whispered, "Charlie Bucket." "Charlie!" cried Mr. Wonka. "Well, well, well. So there you are. You're the one who found your ticket only yesterday, didn't you?" Yes, I read all about it in this morning's papers. Just in time, my dear boy. I'm so glad, so happy for you. And this, your grandfather? Delighted to meet you, sir. Overjoyed, enraptured, enchanted, all right. Excellent. Is everybody in now? 5 children. Yes, good. Now you will please follow me. Our tour is about to begin. But do keep together. Please don't wander off by yourselves. I shouldn't like to lose any of you at this stage of the proceedings. Oh dear me, no." Charlie glanced back over his shoulder and saw the great iron entrance gates slowly closing behind them. The crowds on the outside were still pushing and shouting. Charlie took a last look at them, then, as the gates closed with a clang, all sight of the outside world disappeared. "Here we are," cried Mr. Wonka, trotting along in front of the group. "Through this big red door, please. That's right, it's nice and warm inside. I have to keep it warm inside the factory because of the workers. My workers are used to an extremely hot climate. They can't stand the cold. They'd perish if they went outdoors in this weather. They'd freeze to death." "But who are those workers?" asked Augustus Gloop. "All in good time, my dear boy," said Mr. Wonka, smiling at Augustus. "Be patient. You shall see everything as we go along. Are you all of you inside? Good. Would you mind closing the door? Thank you." Charlie Bucket found himself standing in a long corridor that stretched away in front of him as far as he could see. The corridor was so wide that a car could easily have been driven along it. The walls were pale pink. The lighting was soft and pleasant. "How lovely and warm," whispered Charlie. "I know, and what a marvellous smell," answered Grandpa Joe, taking a long, deep sniff. All the most wonderful smells in the world seemed to be mixed up in the air around them. The smell of roasting coffee, and burnt sugar, and melting chocolate, and mint, and violets, and crushed hazelnuts, and apple blossom, and caramel, and lemon peel. As far away in the distance, from the heart of the great factory, there came a muffled roar of energy, as though some monstrous, gigantic machine was spinning its wheels at breakneck speed. "Now this, my dear children," said Mr. Wonka, raising his voice above the noise, "this is the main corridor. You will hang your coats and hats on those pegs over there, and then follow me. That's the way. Good. Everybody ready? Come on then, here we go." He trotted off rapidly down the corridor with the tails of his plum-coloured velvet coat flapping behind him, and the visitors all hurried after him. It was quite a large party of people when you come to think of it. There were 9 grown-ups and 5 children, 14 in all. So you can imagine that there was a good deal of pushing and shoving as they hustled and bustled down the passage, trying to keep up with the swift little figure in front of them. "Come on," cried Mr. Wonka. "Get a move on, please. We'll never get round today if you dawdle like this." Soon he turned right off the main corridor onto another slightly narrower passage. Then he turned left, then left again, then right, then left, then right, then right, then left. The place was like a gigantic rabbit warren, with passages leading this way and that in every direction. "Don't you let go of my hand, Charlie," whispered Grandpa Joe. "Notice how all these passages are sloping downwards," cried out Mr. Wonka. "We are now going underground. All the most important rooms in my factory are deep down below the surface." "Why is that?" somebody asked. "There wouldn't be nearly enough space for them up on top," answered Mr. Wonka. "These rooms we are going to see are enormous. They're larger than football fields. No building in the world would be big enough to house them. But down here, underneath the ground, I've got all the space I want. There's no limit, so long as I hollow it out." Mr. Wonka turned right. He turned left. He turned right again. The passages were sloping steeper and steeper downhill now. Then suddenly Mr. Wonka stopped in front of him. There was a shiny metal door. The party crowded round. On the door, in large letters, it said, "The Chocolate Room." we'll take this opportunity to have a little look at some of the illustrations. So the illustration for this chapter is there. Very classic. Quite a nice one there of Mr. Wonka, and I'm going to take the assumption that that's Veruca's salt there. So we'll move on and we'll have a look at some of the other ones as we go along. Chapter 15, The Chocolate Room. An important room this, cried Mr. Wonka, taking a bunch of keys from his pocket and slipping one into the keyhole of the door. This is the nerve centre of the whole factory, the heart of the whole business, and so beautiful. I insist upon my rooms being beautiful. I can't abide ugliness in factories. In we go. But do be careful, my dear children. Don't lose your heads. Don't get overexcited. Keep very calm. Mr. Wonka opened the door. 5 children and 9 grown-ups pushed their ways in. And oh, what an amazing sight it was now met by their eyes. They were looking down upon a lovely valley. There were green meadows on either side of the valley, and along the bottom of it there flowed a great brown river. What is more, there was a tremendous waterfall halfway along the river, a steep cliff over which the water curled and rolled in a solid sheet, and then went crashing down into a boiling, churning whirlpool of froth and spray. Below the waterfall, and this was the most astonishing sight of all, a whole mass of enormous gas pipes were dangling down into the river from somewhere high up in the ceiling. They were really enormous pipes. There must have been a dozen of them at least, and they were sucking up the brownish muddy water from the river and carrying it away to God knows where else. And because they were made of glass, you could see the liquid flowing and bubbling along inside them, and above the noise of the waterfall, you could hear the never-ending suck, suck, suck in sound of the pipes as they did their work. Graceful trees and bushes were growing alongside the river banks. Weeping willows and alders and tall clumps of rhododendrons with their pink and red and mauve blossoms. In the meadows there were thousands of buttercups. There, cried Mr. Wonka, dancing up and down and pointing at his gold-topped cane at the great brown river. It's all chocolate. Every drop of that river is hot, melted chocolate of the finest quality. The very finest quality. There's enough chocolate in there to fill every bathtub in the entire country, and all the swimming pools as well. Isn't it terrific? Just look at my pipes. They suck up the chocolate and carry it away all to the other rooms in the factory where it is needed. Thousands of gallons in an hour, my dear children, thousands and thousands of gallons. The children and their parents were too flabbergasted to speak. They were staggered. They were dumbfounded. They were bewildered and dazzled. They were completely bowled over by the hugeness of the whole thing. They simply stood and stared. The waterfall is most important, Mr. Wonka went on. It mixes the chocolate. It churns it up. It pounds it and beats it. It makes it light and frothy. No other factory in the world mixes its chocolate by waterfall. But it's the only way to do it properly. The only way. And do you like my trees? He cried out, pointing with his stick. And my lovely bushes, do you think they look pretty? I told you I hated ugliness. And of course, they're all edible. All made of something different and delicious. And do you like my meadows? Do you like my grass and my buttercups? The grass you're standing on, my dear little ones, is made of a new kind of soft, minty sugar that I've just invented. I call it Swudge. Try a blade. Please do. It's delectable. Automatically, everybody bent down and picked one blade of grass. Everybody, that is, except Augustus Gloop, who took a big handful, and Violet Beauregard, before tasting her blade of grass, took the piece of world-breaking chewing gum out of her mouth and stuck it carefully behind her ear. "Isn't it wonderful?" whispered Charlie. "Hasn't it got a wonderful taste, Grandpa?" "I could eat the whole field," said Grandpa Joe, grinning with delight. "I could go round on all fours like a cow and eat every blade of grass in this field." "Try a buttercup," cried Mr. Wonka. "They're even nicer." Suddenly, the air was filled with screams of excitement. The screams came from Veruca Salt. She was pointing frantically at the other side of the river. "Look! Look over there!" she screamed. "What is it? It's moving! He's walking! It's a little person! It's a little man! Down there below the waterfall!" Everybody stopped picking buttercups and stared across the river. "She's right, Grandpa," cried Charlie. "It is a little man. Can you see him?" "I see him, Charlie," said Grandpa Joe excitedly. And now everybody started shouting at once. "There's two of them! My gosh, so there is! There's more than two. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5! What are they doing? Where do they come from? Who are they?" Children and parents alike rushed to the edge of the river to get a closer look. "Aren't they fantastic? No higher than my knee. Look at their funny long hair." The tiny men, they were no larger than medium-sized dolls, had stopped what they were doing, and now they were staring back across the river at the visitors. One of them pointed towards the children, and then he whispered something to the other 4, and all 5 of them burst into peals of laughter. "But they can't be real people," Charlie said. "Of course they are real," Mr. Wonka answered. "They're Oompa Loompas." So let's have a little look there as we reach the end of chapter 15, The Chocolate Room. So it's a lovely illustration there of Mr. Wonka in the room. And we've also got an illustration of the Oompa Loompas, which is quite cool. So a little bit different than how they've been depicted in the other areas of the media. But this is obviously just an extract and hopefully just a tantalising little snippets of the story for anyone who actually hasn't perhaps read the story but knows of the story. It further goes on, and there's obviously some differences to different particular versions you've seen of it in the media, but it's an absolute classic and it's such a wonderful story, as you would expect from Roald Dahl. Definitely one of my favourites, maybe a little bit biased as I was lucky enough to perform in a show as the narrator, so I actually got to read it for the show, which was really nice. But yeah, let's have a look at a couple of the illustrations. We'll just take just some random ones because Quentin Blake's art is so wonderful. It's inspired so many artists. I'm sure you've seen plenty of books that are around today. I mean, up in our bookshelf just along here, there's a collection of the David Walliams stories. The artists for them, I apologise, I don't know exactly off the top of my head the name of the artist, but it's obviously very influenced by Quentin Blake's work. And there's plenty of other artists who have been, and why not? It's absolutely beautiful work, so detailed yet so simple. So here's a nice one of Charlie, his mum and dad, and some of his grandparents. Which is really cute, I like that one. And then as I just jump through to try and find one which is quite cool, you've got this one of, here we go, Gates to the Factory, which is really cool. So I'm not going to go any further with the illustrations into the story of what further than we've actually read, because for anyone who actually hasn't seen it, I don't want to give away too much, but we knew about the family, we knew about the factory. But yeah, this is just absolutely delightful little story. It doesn't take too long to read, so a wonderful little thing to pick up and really familiarise yourself with. A lovely book to have in your library at home. Highly recommend having a copy of any of the Roald Dahl books that you love. And I really hope you've enjoyed sharing this story with us today. So thank you for spending your afternoon with us. We hope we've inspired you to go and have some chocolates, because that is definitely what I'm going to be having. I'm sorry if you have to have the honey, but I am definitely having some chocolate with my lunchtime now. Can't help it. I don't think I have anything as cool as the grass sugar or the buttercups. I think I've just got plain old boring chocolate, but chocolate's chocolate. So thank you again for coming along. We hope that you can join us for the next story, and we'll see you soon. Say bye, Pooh. Bye. Bye. Thank you.